Okay, in this video here, I'm going to show you some things that hopefully you haven't seen before. And these are all in connection with the Revelation 12 sign. In this video, I'm going to show you the two witnesses. We know that when the tribulation begins, two witnesses are going to appear on the scene, and I'm going to show you in the constellations where I believe the sign of the two witnesses appears. The throne room of God, I'm going to show you where that is, because when we get raptured, where do we go? We go to the throne room of God. So I think it's not unreasonable to see that in the Revelation 12 sign, and it'll become very obvious to you once I show that to you. The coming of the Antichrist. When we view the Revelation 12 sign in the days before September 23rd, there's a lot of things that are happening. There's a lot of things that happen between the eclipse and the 23rd, and they're all really technically part of the Revelation 12 sign. And when we view the Revelation 12 sign from the pyramids of Giza or Jerusalem, they're very close to each other. There's some things happening in the heavens, and I think this, I'm going to tell you and I'm going to show you what I believe is the sign of the coming of the Antichrist and some other things. So fasten your seatbelts. I had to make this video in kind of a very short period of time. So it's I don't say it's like real rough, but it's informative. I hope you enjoy it. And well, fasten your seatbelts and let's get going. In this video clip, I'm going to show you what I believe is to be the sign of the two witnesses. What we're looking at here on the screen is the Great American Eclipse. You can see the date below here is 8/21/2017. We can see that the moon is in front of the sun here in the constellation Leo. We've got the star Regulus here, and we can see that we have the planet Jupiter is in the womb of Virgo, getting ready to be birthed here by September 21st, so it'll be out here. And you can see something very, very interesting here if you're observant here. We've got the constellation Gemini, and within the constellation Gemini, what do we see? We see the planet Venus. In Revelation 22:16, Jesus calls himself the bright and morning star. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. Okay, the planet that represents the bright morning star is the planet Venus. And the planet Venus is in what constellation? It's the constellation Gemini. And what is the constellation Gemini? Constellation Gemini is twins. When I first looked this up on Stellarium here, and I was looking basically more at this, all of a sudden I realized, wow, we've got Venus in the constellation that represents two people. And the very first thing that popped into my mind was the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. The two witnesses in the book of Revelation appear at the beginning of the tribulation. Now, Jesus is the bright and morning star. And so here we have a representation of Jesus sitting here. And who do the two witnesses testify about? They testify about Jesus. Again, Jesus is the bright and morning star. So before the tribulation begins, the tribulation will probably begin in October of this year. That's what most people who are studying this stuff believe. And that's basically what I believe. We're going to see the Revelation 12 sign come to fulfillment on the September 23rd. And then we're going to see the two witnesses appear. And what we're looking at here is, I think we really are watching. We're 40 days from Yom Kippur, 30 days from the Feast of Trumpets. This is known as the season of Teshuvah. Teshuvah is about watching and waiting and repenting and getting ready for the return of the Messiah. It's about the opening of the gates on the Feast of Trumpets. The gates of heaven are opened, and the righteous nation enters in. This is from Isaiah. The constellations were given to us by God to do what? To tell us a story. And what is that story? It's a story of redemption. It begins with what? It begins with the virgin birth, and it ends with what? We learn in Revelation, it ends with the lion, Jesus, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Begins with the virgin and ends with the lion. It's interesting because the sun and the moon, they all traverse in this direction. So they start in September is the beginning of the civil year, the Jewish calendar. In September, the sun, which is here, every September the sun starts here, then every month it moves through one of the constellations. By the end, in August, and what we see right now, the sun is in what? It's in the constellation Leo. Begins with a virgin, and it ends with a lion. And so we see the story of redemption. And with the story of redemption, is it too far-fetched that God would do? He would, we don't really understand what's going on when I've read Bollinger, I've read a lot of different stuff out of the stars and stuff, and the reality is it's, they're speculating what all these constellations mean. But when you look at this here and you take a look at Gemini, you get two witnesses. We know we're headed into the end times. We've got this eclipse, and it comes on Teshuvah, and it comes on Elul 1, and everything is coming together. I don't think it's much of a stretch to see that this is the sign of the two witnesses coming. And basically I want to wrap up this section, and I'm going to move on to the next. Okay, in this section I'm going to be talking about the throne room of God, and do we see in the Revelation 12 sign, is there the throne room of God? And I'm going to show you where the throne room of God is in the Revelation 12 sign. Right now what you're looking at here is we're looking at the Revelation 12 sign from Jerusalem on 9/23 at sunset. And we see we have the planet Jupiter here, we have the moon, planet Jupiter here, excuse me. We've got the moon under our feet, and below, this is the horizon here. Below the horizon we can see the constellation Leo setting. Now there's something interesting I'm going to be talking about in another video. If you notice Mercury, Venus, and Mars, there's a particular spacing that's going on here. And this spacing just happens to match the Belt of Orion. And in a video coming up here, I will talk about that because there's some interesting things about the constellation Orion. It's one of the very few constellations that are mentioned in the Bible. I mean, it talks about the Pleiades, it talks about the Belt of Orion, and I think the other one is it talks about Ursa Major is one of the other ones. It's in the book of Job. Okay, when we get raptured, where do we go? We go to where? We go to the throne room of God. If we go to Revelation chapter 4, which I have here in front of me, we see, after this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice that I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. So when we get raptured, this basically is a representation of the rapture. John's getting basically raptured to heaven. And when we get raptured to heaven, where do we go? We go to the throne room of God. And on the throne room of God here, we're going to see a description of all of that. He says, and the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby, a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. There were the 24 elders. They were dressed in white crowns of gold. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbling, peals of thunder. In front of their own 7 lamps. These are 7 spirits of God. And in front of the throne there is what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. Now here's where things get interesting, and this is where I'm going to show you where in the sign of Revelation 12 the throne room is. It says right here, it says, in the center around the throne were what? There were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and back. The first living creature was like a lion, like an ox. The third, the face like a man. The fourth, like a flying eagle. And then it goes on and talks about that, and they sing, holy, holy, holy. And then let's see here. Around the throne, so again he continues to talk here, and he says the right hand, goes on, sees the Lamb who was slain. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000s. They all encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength, honor and glory and praise. Then every creature in heaven and earth and under the earth and the sea and all that is in them, saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forevermore. And the 4 living creatures said, amen, and the elders fell down and worshipped. So the question is, where in Revelation 12 are we going to see this? And I'm going to show you this here. This came to me after reading this book here. Okay, the book I was reading was the Cosmic Codes. It says Hidden Messages from the Edge of Eternity. It's by Dr. Chuck Missler. A lot of you who are kind of into this whole end times thing here like I am, you're very familiar with his work, and he does really good work. And he talks about hidden design. There's hidden messages in the Bible. Basically, the magic of 7 times 7. A lot of us were familiar with the 7 times 7. There's gematria. He gets into all sorts of stuff in here. Equidistance, the Torah codes. There are actual real Torah codes. A lot of stuff are fakes. There's Yeshua codes. Basically, God's handwriting and signature is on everything. And we see that in the heavens. And after reading this book here, this is what got me thinking. After I was watching a Scott Clark video, and he talks about in Isaiah, he's talking about the planet Jupiter. And in Isaiah, what do we see here? It says, "But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of his peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." So basically, it comes down to this: he was wounded for our transgressions, and by his stripes we are healed. And so when we look at the planet Jupiter here, we see that we have a striped planet, and we have the planet has like a wound on here. Now there really are, I don't believe there are any coincidences with God. And this is really a symbolic representation of Christ. And so, but the interesting thing here is that we know that in the Revelation 12 sign, we know that Jupiter represents what? It represents Christ with the church. And so the planet Jupiter should represent more than just Christ. So we should be able to see Christ, and then we should be able to see what? I believe like the throne room of God, because we are going to be taken when we are raptured, as I showed you in John, we go to the throne room of God. Okay, in the throne room of God, remember again, there are 4 living creatures. We have the elders, which basically represents the church. Go to Revelation 5, and then we have the angels. So basically we've got Christ seated on the throne. Surrounding the throne are the 4 living creatures, and then you've got the elders surrounding the throne and the 4 living creatures, and then beyond that you have the thousands upon thousands of angels. So the question is, okay, how do we represent that? And this is what I think is what we're seeing here. If we go and we look at the moons of Jupiter, now this is very interesting because Jupiter has 69 known moons. Think of Daniel's 69th week. 69 was right now, we're in the 69th week of Daniel. When the tribulation begins, that will be the 70th week of Daniel. And this just a year ago was like 65, and now it flipped to 69, which I think is interesting just by itself. But what's interesting here, again, I talked about there was like we have the 4 creatures that surround the throne room of God. Well, when you go to the moons, there's 69 moons, but the most massive of the moons are the 4 Galilean moons. Now, these were the moons that were discovered by Galileo in 1610, and the Simon Marius, I guess he's getting credit for it now too. I don't remember that when I was going to school. But so the Galilean moons are by far the largest and most massive objects to orbit Jupiter, with the remaining 65 moons and its rings together comprising just 0.003 of the total orbiting mass. So basically you have you got the 4 giant moons, and then you've got all these other smaller moons that are orbiting the planet Jupiter. And the image I get in my mind, this just reminds me exactly of the throne room of God. We've got Christ sitting on the throne. He's like the planet Jupiter, the striped planet with a wound. And then we have these 4 moons that are surrounding the throne. And then we have the elders, which represents the church. And then we have all the angels, and that's represented by these 69 moons that surround Jupiter. And I think that's pretty cool, and that's my take on it. You can come to a different conclusion, but like I say, I don't think there's any coincidences with God, and that there could have been 10 moons, there could have been 20, there could have been any number, but no, what are there? There are 4 moons, and there are 4 large moons, and then we have all these smaller moons. We know that Jupiter is a planet that basically protects the Earth. It attracts like all the asteroids and things. Smaller objects are all drawn to it. That's almost another symbolic representation of Christ drawing all men unto him, unto salvation. And so that's basically my take on this. In my next little clip here, I'm going to do I think I'll be talking about the pyramids and the constellation Orion and the Belt, and I talked a little bit earlier about I just happened to notice when I overlaid the Mercury, Venus, and Mars onto the Belt of Orion, and you scale it in, it matches. So I think there's something going on here too. So you'll see that in my next clip. Okay, in this video clip, I want to talk about the pyramids that are found in Giza here, and I'm going to be referencing Daniel Madsen's website, watchfortheday.org, because he's done a really good job on here. This is a really big article, and some things are hard for people to understand, so I'm going to try and walk you through a few things, show you some things. I'm only going to scratch the surface. You can go to his site and read and learn more about it. But basically it comes down to this. There are the pyramids in Egypt. I believe, and a lot of people believe, they were put there by God. And here's one of the reasons why that we believe that. And this comes from, you can see it from Isaiah 19:19 through 20. It says, "In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. And it will be for a sign and for a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they will cry to the Lord because of their oppressors, and he will send them a Savior and a mighty one, and he will deliver them, which has set signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, even to this day." And that's Jeremiah. What's interesting here, he talks about there's an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. So you'll learn here what Daniel Mattson talks about here. He gets into here about the pyramid. I mean, the pyramids are kind of a tricky thing because, I mean, people believe a lot of different things about it. But what's interesting is that in the pyramid, it's talking about the border here. It says, "According to scriptures, God has placed wonders in Egypt to be a sign at the return of the Lord to deliver those who will call upon the Lord." This altar is said to be a border, but yet in the middle. Giza means border, and it's at the border of Upper and Lower Egypt. Therefore, it is also in the middle of Egypt. Very interesting. The Great Pyramid, the last remaining wonder of the ancient world, is located in Giza. The nature of the Great Pyramid and its complex makes it the only real candidate fitting the prophecy found in Isaiah. Okay, in the Great Pyramid, there are these angles. And one of the angles is known as the Christ angle. And that's this angle here. It's 26.3 degrees. You can see it here, and you can see it here. Now, it's interesting, if you take what's known as the Christ angle, and if you go look at the Great Pyramid, and we can see here, he's got a chart of this here. The Christ angle is 26 degrees, 18 minutes, and 9 seconds. Now, the Great Pyramid, this is from I've kind of checked some things out here on my own. I know for a fact by listening to Chuck Missler and others that this here faces directly north, and it's like super, super accurate. It's more accurate than a number of observatories. This here then would be facing due east. Now, if you go to Google Maps or Google Earth, what I found is when I take and I use this as the baseline, not the true east, because there's like a 1 degree difference. If you use this as the base and you throw this angle of 26, 18 degrees, 9 minutes from the base of the Great Pyramid, it will take you directly to Bethlehem. That's what I found. You know, we're on a globe. I don't know if there's what kind of, you know, you got a round thing and you got straight lines going. I'm not sure how that all works. But I did find it fascinating, though, that it does, for me anyhow, it works from this here. And so you have this Christ angle of 26 degrees, 18 minutes, and 9 seconds. Now, the question is, how does that play into the sign that we see coming here in the next couple of weeks? Okay, now here's where things get interesting. The Christ angle is going to reappear, but in a different way. It's going to appear on September 20th, and it's going to appear in the constellation Leo. You're going to see there's going to be a conjunction between Venus and Regulus. And if we measure that from the sun and the moon are going to be pretty close to parallel, and we measure this angle, we're going to see the Christ angle. It repeats on this particular day. It happens to do this every year between Regulus and the sun and the moon, but the moon isn't always there on this day. But this angle does repeat on September, approximately, so many days before the equinox. But this particular is very interesting because you're going to have you have the sun, you have the moon, and then you have Venus and Regulus are in conjunction. Okay, here we are now. We're at Giza. Oops. I don't want to come down too far. Anyhow, we're at Giza here. It's 9/20/17. We've got the horizon here, and we've got the sun and moon are just below here, and we have the constellation Leo here, and Venus and Regulus are in conjunction right now. And what I've done is I've shown you here, this is 26 degrees, 18 minutes, and 40 seconds. This is a super precision measurement. I'll show you here. I mean, it's super accurate. I don't think we have to be, that accurate. It's definitely, this is the day, though, that this occurs. If we go up one day, you can see everything is offset. If we go down, we go to the 20th again, where this is the most accurate day that this particular angle appears between the sun and the moon and the constellation Leo. So again, we see the Christ angle, and we see a conjunction of Venus and Regulus. And when Christ came the first time, we saw a number of conjunctions. Regulus is the king star. Venus, Jesus in Revelation, in the book of Revelation, calls himself, he says, I am the bright and morning star, and the bright and morning star is the planet Venus. So to me, when we look at this, this is just another sign of the coming of the Lord. The Lord is coming. In 3 days, we're going to have the sign of Revelation 12. There's something else I'm going to show you here, but here's where things get interesting. The pyramids are a very, very close match to the Belt of Orion. If we bring this back a little bit, now right now you're going to see the Venus and Regulus are on what's called the prime vertical. The prime vertical is if we draw a line through the east and we go straight up through here, I mean it's basically straight up east. If we go over now, this is interesting because if you've read any of Michael Heiser's books, you're going to understand that Orion, he is in the pagan world, he's the shepherd king. And we know that the true shepherd king, Michael Heiser talks about this, the true shepherd king is Jesus. And if you go through your Bible and you do a search on shepherd Jesus, I am the good shepherd. He talks about it over and over again how he is the good shepherd, the true shepherd. In the pagan world, they had like Orion was the false shepherd. And Michael Heiser makes this case when, after the Star of Bethlehem appeared, he talks about the rising of the constellation Orion being a sign of the true shepherd king. Well, there's something very, very interesting about this because the true shepherd king, we see here, we've got the conjunction of Venus and Regulus, and then we've got due south, we have the constellation Orion, which is like the constellation of the shepherd king. Now, in the thought of the ancient Hebrews, the enemies of Israel, both the physical and the spiritual enemies, always came from the north. Whenever Israel was basically destroyed or taken down, the enemies always came from the north and from the reaches of the far north. And the spiritual enemies, for example, Baal and all the demonic entities, they came from the really far reaches of the north. I mean, as far as like you can imagine. So when I was reading this book, I thought, I wonder who is on the northern horizon. And so surprise, surprise, actually it's no surprise at all to me at all because God has got his hand on everything. What do we see here? We've got Draco, the dragon. Let's turn this on so you can see here. So I think there's another story going on here. We've got the shepherd king coming who destroyed the works of the devil. And the devil, in the mind of the ancient Israelite, Satan always came from the reaches of the far north, and this is about as far north as you can get. You can see Draco, he's right on the horizon here. His head is actually just tucked a little bit under the horizon. We see the rest of his tail sitting here. Okay, now there's another way to look at this, because you have to remember there is a false Messiah coming. There is a false Christ coming. And this is what I found interesting from both Jerusalem and from Giza. If we look at this date here, on 9/18, and this is something that's going to be visible, the sun will be below the horizon. It's going to be visible to an observer on Earth, and that's this. The moon is going to block out the star Regulus. Again, this occurs both at Giza and Jerusalem. They're not that far apart, and so the view from the two is very similar. And so what this is telling me is you're blocking out the king star. So in other words, there's a dark, evil king coming. We know that from scripture. We know that there's an antichrist. He's not really against, doesn't mean he's against Christ. It means instead of, in replace of. And so we know we have this dark lord who is coming, and he's going to deceive the earth. And so if we take that perspective and we look at that, and we come here again, and we've got the spin this the other way here, right when this runs right through the center star, we've got this over here, Venus and Regulus. If we go forward 2 days and we move this here, right when the prime meridian is running through these two, we see that the meridian, which is the line that runs from north to south, is running straight through Orion. So again, what do we have here? There's another way to look at this, and this is another thing that's kind of popped in my head, or is this. We've got a false Messiah coming, and we've got a false shepherd king. In the pagan world, they're looking for a shepherd king. So here we have this here, and who's this shepherd king? This is another interpretation. Well, the shepherd king is Satan. It's the devil. He's sitting in the north. He's in the far reaches of the north. And the world and Israel for a time is going to be deceived by him. And I think that's what we see with the darkening. If we go back 2 days, go back here to the 18th, and we zoom in, we see that the moon is covering that. Again, to me, this tells me that there's a dark, evil king coming, and we know that from Scripture. Okay, another thing that's really, really interesting here is the view from Giza, because we've got the Great Pyramid here, and we've got these other two pyramids here. But what we have is, what is known as the Sphinx. The Sphinx is facing exactly due east. It's looking due east, and the Sphinx is believed to have originally been a lion. And let me find here. I will bring up that article. This is an article from the Daily Mail. It was back in December 2008. It says the Sphinx in Egypt might have originally had the face of a lion, it's claimed, and it could be much older than previously thought. The reason they believe this is because this head is so small and this is eroded and this isn't eroded. And so that makes sense. If this here pyramid structure was built by God, we know that Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so you have this lion who is facing due east. Okay, and what's really amazing, you've got 12 constellations that could rise in the east in September, and that's when the Feast of Trumpets is, and that's when the Lord should return. And so if you just imagine here right now, we've got in the due east, what do we have? We have a lion that's rising in the due east. We've got the Sphinx facing due east. It's as though the lion is watching for the coming of the true Lion King, the Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus. And so you look due east, and when the sun, this is, you can see this, the sign is visible. If we crank it back here, we go back, let's go up to when Venus, we've got the constellation Leo. We'll run the clock back. Let's go back an hour. We have the constellation Leo rising in the east. We've got the conjunction here between Venus and Regulus. And what's interesting here is, when it's occurring in the constellation Leo, I mean, that to me is just, this whole thing is just amazing by itself. And then as the sunlight fades, the very last thing you're going to see is the planet Venus. All the rest of the stars, the constellations, they're all going to fade away, and you're going to see the planet Venus. It's like the coming. Jesus is the bright and morning star, and that has to do with like the dawning of a new age. It's the beginning of a new era. It's the beginning of a new time. And we know that if this is the time of the rapture and then the beginning of the tribulation, the beginning of the millennium, we're looking at the beginning of a new age here. And I think this is all symbolic as to what's happening. As the sun fades, as this rises, Venus is the last thing to disappear. And it's, the coming of Yeshua. All right, here's another little interesting thing that I just want to kind of discuss here. There's this, debate when people are saying, the sign of Revelation 12 is false, and they say, Leo's not the crown, and yada, yada, yada. They say, well, this Coma Berenices over here is the crown. Well, you can't even find 12 stars in there. It's almost to the point of ridiculous. Leo, Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is our king. He's king over what? He's king, if Virgo represents Israel, he's the crown, he's the king over Israel. I mean, it makes sense in every way, shape, and form that the crown would be Leo. And what I find interesting here is as the sun rises, crowns are made out of gold. And what you see turning here, I mean, the crown becomes, and the sun rises when it becomes a golden crown. And the last planet, again, as I mentioned just previously, that you're going to see is the planet Venus, and Jesus is, again, the bright and morning star. And, it's all this part of his coming. And as this rises, everything turns golden, like a golden crown. Okay, in this next section here, what I want to do is I want to show you something that is interesting. What it means, I don't know. But here we are on 9/23. We're at sunset in Giza. It could be the same in Jerusalem. Again, they're very, very close. It doesn't matter. But I was looking at this, and here we've got Virgo. We've got Jupiter here. We're kind of in that twilight hour. In the twinkling of an eye, when the a possible time for the rapture to occur. But I noticed something here. I was looking at Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and I kind of noticed the spacing here, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I thought, what happens if we take these and we overlay them, we put them into Photoshop, and we overlay them on the constellation of Orion. Now here's what I had to do here. So this is kind of like, might be pushing it, but interesting nonetheless. I had to take them and I had to do a mirror image of it, and then I scaled it. And when I did the mirror image and I scaled it and I set Mercury here on this part of the belt and I put Venus here in the belt, it's a very, very close match. Is it perfect? No, it's not, but it's very, very close. The reality is I design things for a living. I have a lot of patents, and there is no such thing as perfect. Everything has a kind of a tolerance. It has a range, and this is actually a pretty close fit, and in reality it's actually a closer fit than let's see, I'll turn the pyramids on. Where do I go here? Let's make this opacity down. When you overlay the pyramids, let's turn off the Mars thing. This is an overlay of the pyramids onto the Belt of Orion here. If I move it back and forth a little bit, you can see it's a little tricky because when you're in Google Earth, it tends to shift. You can see like the tips of the pyramids aren't directly above, so I don't know how accurate when you overlay this really is, and you have to be careful in Stellarium too, because it can skew when you move the constellation around. The things move around, so it's a little tricky to say exactly, but it's a close fit, and I find it interesting. So then the next question, okay, what does this mean? Well, if we go to the book of Revelation, it talks about the belt of Orion is described in the book of Job. It says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or can you loose the cords of Orion? If you've read a lot of books by Tom Horn, which I have, and you'll understand something about demonic things and entities, the loosening and binding a lot of times has to do with the binding of spirits and the binding of, and there's kind of this thought that something related to the constellation of Orion that we've got. It says, can you loose the cords of Orion? It's when the cords of Orion are loosed, the demons of Revelation 9. Let's just go to Revelation 9 here and take a quick look. It says, the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. He opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given them as scorpions of the earth have power. Now, if you study this, what people believe this is, these are demonic entities being released. And so when he talks about the loosening of the belt of Orion, in some of the Tom Horn books, it's just speculation, but is the loosening of the belt of Orion, is it talking about Revelation 9, and when you loosen the belt of Orion and you release the demons out of the pit of hell? And is that what we're seeing here? I don't know, but it's an interesting speculation. Okay, then we also see, I almost forgot about this here. We see here in verse 13, it says, then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, one saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and the day and the month of the year were released, so that they would kill a third of mankind. Again, we see, what do we see here? It says, release the four angels who are bound. And again, in Job, it says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords? Again, there are angels who are bound. It says release them. So when they're being released, they're being loosened. And so is that what's happening? Very much possibly. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video that I put together here. I hope you have learned something new. Hopefully there's some new things here. Right now there is so much coming out. I think, the evidence for what's going on, what's coming this fall is more than overwhelming. I don't know how God could do any more than what he has done. If you study this, if you go to unsealed.org and read all their articles there, the evidence to me is just absolutely positively overwhelming. Again, I don't know how God could do any more. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I says, if you don't know Jesus, now would be a really good time to figure out who this particular individual is, and that you would give your life to him, because he's coming soon, and there are very, very hard times coming on the earth. And if you do it now, he's coming, he takes his people out. He takes them out before the great and terrible day of the Lord. A lot of people think that, well, they're just going to wait until, until the tribulation. They want to party now, and when the tribulation comes, then but it's going to be much, much harder then. If you can't follow the Lord now, I think it's going to be much more difficult during that time. So again, God bless, and I hope you enjoyed the film or the video.